Hey, what's up, hello? I hope you all are doing well. As you may or may not know, John Green's book, Looking for Alaska, has been stalled in production for a number of years from being turned into some sort of filmed adaptation. But now we finally have a Hulu series, an 8-part series, where this has been adapted for television. And as someone who enjoys John Green's work, I knew at some point I would probably go ahead and watch this series, even though I hadn't read Looking for Alaska in many, many years, until I heard that this series was coming out and figured that it was a good time to revisit it before watching it over again. I began it the day it came out and finished it the next day, and with that, there are some points that I'd like to talk about. Firstly, though, I'm not really a television person. I went to university with a bunch of people who were film majors and had very specific opinions about what makes good television and what makes good film, and casting and lighting and how things are conveyed in different parts of the plot and different times. I don't have any of that knowledge, but I did read the book and I do enjoy the source material. So this is just what I think. So if you want this to be like some kind of discussion video about television, whew, this is not it. So firstly, I will say that while there were additional pieces added to this story, things that don't happen in the book but were included in the series in order to further that sort of teen dramatization feeling and to lengthen it so that it could be 8 parts. This is a fairly faithful adaptation. If you look at any of the articles that were written when the news broke that this was going into production, or just watch till the end credits of the series, you'll see that John Green is the executive producer, one of the two, on this. He's been extremely involved in all of the filmed adaptations of his work, which is always wonderful to see that authors are being included so heavily in making their work come to life for the screen. And I say it's a faithful adaptation for several reasons. One, the tone is very akin to the plot. Miles, or Pudge as he's known in the book, just can't escape his own sort of self-interest, the way that a teenage boy probably, I've never been one, but very likely looks at the world. Everything from his perspective he can't get out of his own head. And this series kind of does the same thing. It's consistently a little bit self-involved, but it needs to be, because that's the point of the source material. Which is great because the tone of the series is also akin to the tone of the book. John Green books, as I have said for years, are filled with smart teenagers that speak like him and still do teenage things and make dumb choices despite their obvious intellect, because they are young people who are drawn to the wants of young people. Every small thing at that age, which you might remember if you were a teenager, can seem unbelievably important no matter how minute it is, and that was very well conveyed in the book and also very strongly and properly conveyed in the series as well. The series, like the book, also thrives on emotionality, and if you're not interested in getting into emotions, capital G, capital E, why did you read the source material in the first place would be my question, but there is just such strong evocation of how you're meant to be feeling for these characters, how they're feeling. The cast does a really lovely job of not holding back in tense emotional moments. It's fantastic, and ultimately they do a great job of portraying the sadness that underlies this story. This story is sad, ultimately. A sad thing happens, and everybody is in this sort of unhappy, friendless to suddenly not friendless teenage funk, and this time we're just sort of doing it with heady books from old white dudes that feature prominently in the novel and in the series, who were never ever able to let that go as authors, and so it feeds into that continued sadness. That's the way that the story is. It is sad, and it was very well portrayed. That's not to say that there's no hope in the story and that the characters don't work through or begin to work through and learn from that sadness, but you can't escape the overwhelming feeling that this is, in a lot of ways, just unhappy. The title character, Alaska, for all the excitement she brings, is deeply, deeply unhappy, and that shines through. Firstly, I want to talk about the characters. In the book, you see everything from the perspective of Pudge. You read from Miles' perspective exclusively, and that's changed up a little bit here. You do have some other scenes and other moments across the series that Miles isn't privy to. There are moments with other characters that sort of feed into how they're thoughts are going and how they're feeling, and it lends a wider spectrum of understanding to how everybody is feeling in the wake of certain events. Because of this, it makes it easier to understand their characters' motivations, which makes it easier to understand Miles' reaction. And it's refreshing when we do see those scenes, because it's nice to see the person playing Miles, who I believe is called Charlie Plummer. He does a really nice job. Because Miles as a character very much begins the story alone and isolated and doesn't have any friends, a lot of what he does for the first episode or so is to react to other people and react to the situation he's in. Miles spends a lot of time reacting and grows into some more choice making later on. The actor who's playing him does a really lovely job with that. I think Miles is portrayed excellently. However, if you ask me, it's the performance by Denny Love, who plays the Colonel, that just carries this whole show. This guy gives an incredible performance. His emotionality and toughness through the whole thing, you feel it, you feel for him, you understand his struggle. His interaction with other characters is so stark in some areas, and then also so reserved and internal that you just wish you were getting his story, but I'm almost glad that we don't, because if we did, then he would be the main character and people would probably hate on him a lot more, which is entirely undeserved for the performance that's given here. In the book, I really enjoyed the Colonel. In my rereading of it, leading up to watching this series, I came back to the story and realized just how important the Colonel is to Miles as a friend and for plot development, but also just the way he's written, the strength that's written into him, and the desire to get what is his, and he's got all of these very like Slytherin characteristics, but also the kindness that emanates from him. From the moment he meets Pudge, he takes him under his wing and shows him the school, and he begins a friendship right there and then, and he's a really kind, wonderful, interesting, fierce character, which is so super to see on screen. The third not Alaska friend in this group is Takumi, and honestly, this guy did a great job with some really not great lines. I really wish that we could have seen the part of the book where he's very angry with Miles and the Colonel for keeping things from him. I wish we could have seen the part from the book where he has knowledge about what's happened that the two of them don't have. There's a lot of clash in there where he's excluded or they're excluded, and they just can't seem to push and pull because no one really seems to grasp the fact that everybody loved or loves Alaska differently, and coping with what happens to her will affect them differently. And a lot of them do make the mistake of thinking that they're feeling the depth of what they're feeling and they're the only ones. And in the book, Takumi says, no, like a lot of us loved her. We are all feeling badly. And so that clash, that anger that he has amongst the three of them was not coming across quite so strongly here. I feel like they cut a lot of that out. And had they given Jay Lee that emotionality to work with, I think he would have taken it so far and wide and just really would have brought a little bit more depth to this character that I think we got in the book and we missed out a little bit on in this series. Also, we didn't get to see Takumi rap nearly as much as I would have wanted to. There is a brief moment of that at the smoking hole in the series, but mostly his interest in music and his ability to rap well is sort of portrayed by the way his character is styled, and I would have liked to see him actually execute that. Finally, coming to Alaska, it's hard to talk about her because this book is so beloved by so many people, and there are a lot of extremely strong opinions on what Alaska is based on the text and who Alaska is based on the text. And a lot of people, as we all do, dream up in our heads what we want her to be, what we think that she is, and there will never be an adaptation of anything that is going to meet everyone's expectation. I've seen a lot of consumer response to promotional materials for the series that has people really irritated with how nice she is or how sweet she is or how this or how that she is, and she's not supposed to be that. Alaska wouldn't be that if you read the book, that kind of thing. It's never going to be what you want. It's never going to be your version, but I think what we do get to see is that she is, yes, she's pretty and she can be sweet, but she can also switch moods absolutely in the same moment and be righteously angry and mad. And obviously we're not going to get those aggressive, upset, teenage girl type moments, stereotyped moments in promotional material. And so I think watching the spectrum of her emotionality and the depth of her unhappiness and the depth of her sadness across this, we really do see her as a full character who wants to keep the sadness of herself away from others. She was done so well. I think a lot of the lines that she was given that were not pulled directly from the book really did fit her, and the ones that she did need to execute from the text, which a lot of people will remember, were done well. It's a really solid portrayal. Like I said, she's never going to be what everyone imagines, but I did think that this seemed like a really faithful, true fit. And I loved her 70s vibe. The way this character was styled, she had a lot of like 70s inspired outfits, given that she mentions that she's a regular at thrift stores in the county. That definitely fits. Her Halloween costume, which has serious Stevie Nicks vibes, is just incredible, and I think Alaska would definitely have been on board with like Stevie's self-possessed emotional darkness. That totally fits. Moving on to some of the adult characters, the Eagle, what a joy to watch. That guy, great job. Well done. Like, he's more human. He comes off as more human than in the book. You really only have one moment of that in the book at the end. But I think this is a very nice portrayal of someone who truly cares about these kids. Dr. Hyde, the world religions teacher, is, in my opinion, just the best person at that school, and I loved learning more about his past. We got some backstory on him about his past and how he came to believe what he believes that we don't get in the book, which was super. They made some really interesting choices there with that. They gave him that backstory, but in doing so, we also seem to forget after the first episode that the man is only meant to have one lung. He went back to seeming just a tad bit more alive and with it and less wheezy as he walks around. He still remains old, like wise and sage-like, but he goes back to being perfectly capable of breathing, and I thought we could have kept that consistency a little finer. And then we have Dolores, who's the Colonel's mother. She's honestly the best of everyone, and you can't say enough good things about her. She's fantastic. She does a lot of the right things. I do question her choice to call upon Dr. Hyde's wisdom later in the series, because that definitely did not happen in the book. But that moment was pivotal in showing how Alaska's death was hitting everybody and the stress of that and how it was manifesting within them. So it worked, but it wasn't in the book. Either way, Dolores, great. So there were also a number of events and happenings in this series that were added in that I don't recall there being in the book that did work, and they lend to make it more of a sort of a teen drama situation, which makes sense because this is a teen drama. There are dances, there's a party, there's, like I said before, other perspectives that are being shared that you don't get that perspective in the book. There are some things that worked like those, and there are other things that don't work. I did not enjoy the illusion of what happens between Alaska and Miles right toward the end. I feel like it really ruins the whole idea of her saying "to be continued." And they also changed that line a little bit, and that the weight of that phrase and the weight of her saying that to him lends itself much better if you leave them stopping off at one activity and not progressing all the way to the next one. So that didn't work for me. There's also a moment with the Eagle and another student, one of the weekday warriors, on the bus just after everything happens with Alaska, where the Eagle is very much sort of pouring out his frustrations to this student, and I think it's done in a way for us to be endeared to the Eagle, to humanize him a little bit, to show that he's suffering like everyone else. But honestly, if we think about this in a realistic manner, he should not be doing that with a student. There's no reason for that line to be crossed. Like, that is something you work out with another adult. Did not work for me. The whole bit with his mustache did not work for me, but I guess this is a thing that we do for television. It did endear us to him a little bit more, which is nice, but ultimately not realistic. And then we come to the very end. It was so wonderful to see Speaker Day portrayed on screen. When you read that part of the book where they pull the new greatest prank in Culver Creek history, you just get a sense that it is indeed what Alaska would have wanted, and it's just so well executed in the book. You can't believe that they get away with it. You almost can't believe that they get away with it again when you see it on screen, but seeing it on screen just brings it to life in this whole new, like, cathartic and joyful way. It was really wonderful, even with the character change that they made there, which I did appreciate. I thought it lended itself very well to sort of completing that guy's storyline. One of the things that really was difficult for me about this series, though, was the music. I felt like there was just too much music happening all the time, or maybe it was just too much music with words. And like I said before, I don't really watch a lot of television, so maybe this was just like me binging everything immediately right in a row and it was a music overload. There were a lot of covers of songs from that time period, 2003 to 2005, and they were done in a more like softer, sadder way, which was an interesting choice, and I think the first couple times it worked, but that felt like a repeated theme and I didn't enjoy it. There was just so much music all the time and I felt like it was being used to portray how people were feeling or how you were supposed to be feeling, which was very easily gotten either from the dialogue or from the way that the actors were acting, and just didn't need to be doubled down so hard. I just wasn't crazy about it, especially since music is not like made a prominent feature in the book. It's not really given its own specific mention, so I wonder why they felt they needed to go that hard at it. And the last point I want to make is just something that I feel like I say all the time to all kinds of people, but I've read a lot of reviews of this series that have just come out, and everyone is sort of rehashing the same things that people have said many times over the years when they want to find something negative to say about anything that John Green's ever done. It's like, teens don't talk like that, kids don't talk like that, this is too pretentious, blah blah blah. It's that same sort of blather, and it feels like everyone has just taken every negative review of John Green's work they could find and copy and pasted it and then cut a bunch of pieces up and mashed it all together again and made these reviews and are saying the same thing about the show. Fine, go ahead and have your opinions, but like, the kids don't talk like that piece, just because you didn't or you don't know teenagers that do doesn't mean that they don't. And also, I often find that authors that write with this deep, foreboding sense of trying to get to a greater philosophical concept through a more accessible means, that's the kind of language that just comes out. If we look at Alaska's interests, she's reading all of these books by guys who have that same understanding of the world. So of course she talks the way that she interprets the things that she takes in. They're at this extremely fancy school, probably reading a lot more literature that is going to just imbue them with that same type of language choice over and over. And you see throughout the series the switch they make between this very much sort of like higher thought, so-called pretentious language, and just like normal kids speak. There's a moment when Alaska goes to Dr. Hyde to talk to him about her final paper, and they go back and forth for a bit, and she says, well, in that case, I totally nailed it. That's not the pretentious, not teenager speak that people are talking about. That's a really great example of her ability to switch back and forth between the two. And ultimately, I think I'm just over the idea that authors are meant to cater to a reader's every whim and also bring about all facets of realism in all of their work. It's fiction for a reason. All of what I've seen about the writing of this just drives me nuts because I think it's very well done. It's very faithful to the book, and if you didn't like the source material, why are you watching the adaptation and expecting a different result? Overall, I thought this series was enjoyable. It definitely made me cry at points. It's hard for me to watch other people cry on screen and not cry myself, so maybe that was it. I love when authors have a really strong hand in making their work come to life, and I definitely think that this was worth my time. So if you enjoyed looking for Alaska and you are interested in watching this, definitely go ahead and give it a try. If you've seen it already, I tried to make this as spoiler-free as possible, but if you know the plot of the book, you definitely already know the plot of the series. Let me know down in the comments what you thought about it, if you've seen it, or if you're interested in seeing it in the future. I hope you're having lovely weeks and lovely lives. Everything you want to know about us is in the description, and we'll see you very soon.